Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we're going to talk about the Government Accessibility Empathy Lab, which we've built over the last few years. We started very small and we've built up from there, and it's become very popular, and hopefully some of you will be able to visit it if you haven't already. I'm going to use the laptop. So, first of all, we're from the Government Digital Service, part of the Cabinet Office. Just to let you know what we are, we help government work better for everyone by leading the digital transformation of public services. So we provide a lot of support for government and more increasingly for the wider public sector because of the new accessibility regulations. And particularly from an accessibility point of view, we're one of the teams of accessibility specialists in government. There are a few around different parts of government. So a bit about the history of the Empathy Lab. As I say, we started it nearly 3 years ago. We started with a couple of laptops, 2 Windows laptops in fact, that we used to test and make sure that government elements were accessible. So the government elements and patterns are things that go into government services, transactional services, so things like how do you do form controls, how do you do check your answers, those sort of things. And we did a lot of testing on those to make sure they were accessible. And those have now moved into what's known as the government design system. So there is a whole new setup, and those have been tested against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.0 and going to be tested against the new version of 2.1 to make sure they're fit for purpose, particularly for the new regulations and the fact that government requirements now say you must meet WCAG level AA version 2.1. We did some research. We ran a discovery back in 2016 to find out what government departments needed from an accessibility point of view, because we knew there were some gaps, we knew there were some things needing addressing. And what we found was what we expected really, that there was a lot of work we could do on improving awareness of accessibility and assistive technologies, providing resources in terms of guidance and training and just general resources. So when we moved to our new office in Aldgate in 2017, we had a space set up which Al pushed hard for to get this space within the building to allow us to build an empathy lab. And we started small with the 2 Windows laptops. We added some more equipment to it, so we added some mobile devices. So in particular, an Apple mobile phone, a tablet, an iPad, Android, and a MacBook, in fact, to make that more complete, to give us more of a sort of broad range of things to test against and raise awareness. We've added some other devices more recently, including a switch device, which is quite interesting to show people. People often don't know what these are, and it can be used to just simulate what it might be like to use a device you might suck or blow into or activate with your cheek to operate things. So it can be used to operate whole systems, whether that's on a desktop, a laptop, or on a mobile device. So we added that, and my picture there, that's just a little tribute to this picture of Hampus Sethfors, who was talking about this, saying he used this for a day to try and work out what it was like, and blogged about some of the experiences of using a switch device. So that's quite interesting. So, the assistive technology, that's a big part of the Empathy Lab. Obviously, we wanted to highlight some of the things that people use and to get people to be able to use those, to test with them, to try them out, and to demonstrate them. And we ran a survey to find out what people used when using government services, and we found pretty much what we expected. We got a good idea that already that people used JAWS screen reader, for example, very popular, Zoom text, and Dragon. So we got a list of things that we knew people use. So for example, screen readers on these laptops, we've got JAWS, we've got NVDA, non-visual desktop access, we've got VoiceOver, which is obviously built in on the Mac and on the iOS devices, and we've got TalkBack screen reader on the Android devices. We've also got screen magnifier, Zoom text, which is, again, the most popularly used screen magnifier. There's also built-in screen magnifiers within both Windows and Mac devices. And then from a voice recognition activation point of view, Dragon Naturally Speaking is the obvious one that most people use. It's mostly on Windows, but it is available on Mac as well, although I don't think it's any longer supported on Mac. But there are actually also built-in voice controls on both Windows and Mac, which can be used. We haven't done much in terms of testing, but they can be used, so there's freely available tools as well. We also got a set of visual impairment glasses to demonstrate some aspects of visual impairments, and we got this set from an organisation called Visual Impairment Northeast, a charity. It's like a little suitcase full of glasses, and these glasses have various aspects to them that can simulate some aspects of visual impairments. But what they don't do, and what we tell people, is they don't simulate how this might be for someone on a day-to-day basis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's just to give you an idea of how things might look and how you might have to adjust how you access things. So, for example, there's this, which is, it shows a sort of patchy vision, which might be something like macular degeneration. There's another set here, which simulate tunnel vision by having small pinholes. So it's a very small peripheral area of vision. And you can see what this might look like if you look at something on GovUK. There's a very small area on the screen there. You can see just a small number of links on the page, and it's difficult to find your way around there. We did want to make the whole lab become a dual purpose thing. As I say, we started out with the purpose of testing. We moved on to raising awareness and empathy. We tried to make sure we could do all that at the same time. And we have, as I say, visits, people coming to talk, to listen to us talk about it and go through that. And we show them both aspects of that. So from a testing point of view, we're thinking about compatibility. So compatibility with platforms, so whether it's on Mac or Windows or the various mobile platforms. Obviously the different browsers people use and the assistive technologies people use. From an empathy point of view, it's more about awareness of accessibility barriers, issues and technology. So highlighting some of the issues that people might face when trying to access any kind of services online, any kind of digital services, and the sort of ways they might address that using the technologies, the assistive technologies, or adjustments, things like that. But what we didn't do, and we decided early on, was we're not going to do this for user testing or user research. You probably couldn't tell from the picture earlier, but the lab is kind of an open area in a corridor. It's open and noisy and lacks privacy. And that was deliberate because we wanted it to be open and available for anybody to come and visit and use, and just people walking past, teams to be able to use as and when they needed to. So yeah, no privacy, bit noisy, so it wasn't suitable for user testing. We do have a test lab at GDS, which is a separate facility. And there is the other aspect of testing with users using assistive technologies that can be very difficult. If you're trying to get someone to come in to test things on your equipment, chances are they're going to have different settings. They might just have something as simple as a slightly different keyboard layout that causes problems, or it might be things like the different voice engines they're using, or just the settings they've got. And you can spend a lot of time messing about trying to get things set up, which can lead to wasted time and potentially biased results from testing. We did kind of think about the design of the area. I'm not a designer, but we did get some help from that from one of the designers at GDS who helped us with a lot of that. We started out very agile, so just a few posters and labels, things like that. And then we added a few things like cheat sheets, so lists of screen reader controls, lists of the gestures you can use on VoiceOver on iPhone, for example. So as I say, we've got a design to help improve things with things like new area signs, higher contrast, better quality. Some statistics on permanent disabilities, and we've got several of these in the different areas, but we always highlight the fact that these are just about permanent disabilities, and we shouldn't just be thinking about permanent disabilities, we should always be thinking about temporary and situational impairments and disabilities as well. We did things like labelling the devices to make them easy to identify. And then starting on what we did about visits. So to start with, we decided we were going to make it available to people as much as possible, and it is open to be visited. We've opened it up to anyone basically in the public sector, and that is because of the new accessibility regulations in particular, because everyone in the public sector, apart from a few exceptions, has got to make their websites and documents and things accessible. So we wanted to open it up to the public sector, particularly to be able to support the needs of those for the new regulations. We started with a fairly ad hoc visitor process, and it was pretty informal, but we found we needed to refine that because there's only 2 of us running the visits, and it's just a part of our day job, if you like. It's not our complete day job. So we had to restrict it in some way, and we had to make it efficient from our point of view, but also efficient from the point of view of people visiting. So we offer an availability calendar so people can find out when they can visit, and we try and make it as easy and frictionless as possible for people to come and visit. Most of those visits have actually been from government departments and organisations and local authorities. Now obviously we're London-based, so most of those have been local London-based authorities and government organisations, but we have had people come from far afield, from Wales and North, Manchester, Liverpool, places. And this is sort of just a graph of the visits from July last year up to January this year, indicating the number of requests we get, which is more than the number of visits. We can't always satisfy the need for visits, and some do get cancelled and rescheduled. But it's gradually increased over time, and we're still kind of, as I say, restricting it in terms of numbers, but we'll talk a bit about that later. Interestingly, we keep some stats on visitors who come, and the majority of visitors were content designers, closely followed by user researchers. So there's a lot of interest from content design, user research, but we get people across all different disciplines. Some other stats: 86% used it for learning, 72% for empathy, and 60% use it for testing. So quite a lot of people come in and want to actually look at something they've built or some of their live services just to test them, and we've that's varied from some very ad hoc testing, people coming in and just exploring, to people coming in with a whole test plan and actually going through things in quite a formal way. Obviously, any kind of new service, new setup has its challenges. It was challenging initially to set up the space and to get the equipment. GDS is a mostly Apple environment, MacBook, so Windows laptops are kind of outside the norm, and it was quite difficult to get hold of 2 laptops. It was even harder to get one with Windows 7 and one with Windows 10 on, because we wanted to run different versions of JAWS, for example, on the different laptops. But we got there, Costs can be a barrier. The Windows laptops typically probably cost around £2,000, including the hardware and the assistive text software that we've got on there. We've got JAWS, we've got Dragon, we've got Zoom Text on each of those laptops. We kept a log of visitors just for, again, for stats. So we had a spreadsheet of people coming, but also people actually visiting the lab, and that includes people hopefully internally who come and just tick these boxes to say what they've used it for. It's a statistical thing really, just to find out how usage is going and whether we're doing the right thing, whether we need to change things. One of the things we learned was we need to nail everything to the bench, or more succinctly, this sort of thing. So, which is a picture of a hammer and a nail and a lightning cable. We didn't literally do that, but we did find we had to fix things down. We put locks on the laptops and things like that. We didn't expect anything to be stolen or anything, but things do get borrowed. And what we've found is it isn't the laptops and the devices that get borrowed, it's the cables. People borrow the lightning cables on a regular basis, so we've had to be fairly agile and put things like this, so it says stop, don't remove cables. We've also found, because of the number of Kensington locks and cables, USB cables and headsets and things like that, it does get a bit messy, but nobody's really complained about that, so maybe that isn't that important. You know, obviously we don't want it to be untidy, we want it to look nice, but it's more important that it's functional and that people can use it and do the things they need to do. And as I said before, there is a limitation that it's mostly just Anika and myself doing the visits, hosting the visits. We have had a couple of people volunteer to help out with that, but not on a regular basis, so we are trying to get more people involved in that. Another slight challenge is just keeping it up to date in terms of maintaining the software, the operating systems. Excuse me. Fortunately, IT support just let us get on with that. They don't have to be managed devices and things. But we do have to try and keep things up to date on there. There's a slight problem sometimes when people come in and they want to test something like a prototype, and they come in and they haven't got credentials with them, or they've got to sign in to get them. So we always encourage people to bring those with them, make sure they've got those. And also there's often a case that they've tested it in their own environment, but they've got they might have the IP addresses whitelisted, so they are restricted in where they can run it. So we encourage people to make sure it will run on a public network, which we use, like GDS. There's a whole other challenge around administration, managing the calendars, spreadsheets and emails, and we're getting some help with that now from the reception at GDS. And I'll now hand over to Anika to talk about the personas.
Well, as Richard mentioned, the Empathy Lab has more two different purposes, one for testing and one for empathy, and I will talk about the empathy bit, basically. In October 2017, we published 7 different accessibility personas, basically made up people who just and text about them, which just makes it easier to think about users with access needs. Those 7 personas had different types of access needs, or really a huge variation of them. And so we wanted to do something more practical with them, not just having text somewhere, but doing something more practical. And what we did is we created logins on some Chromebooks, so you can experience the web as them, as those personas. So we've usually done 2 things. We implemented something that would simulate the condition they have, or can also be multiple conditions. And then you also focus on using the assistive technology they would be using to help them overcome certain aspects of that condition. This is a photo of the 3 Chromebooks. So we have, at the very right-hand side of the lab, we have 3 different Chromebooks, and there we are logged in as various personas. This is what it looks like when you log into one of those. So actually you have, on the right-hand side, you have all of the personas ready. You just need to log in. And this is an example. This is Simone. Simone is dyslexic. The simulation of her condition is that the letters are scrambling. We don't mean to say with that dyslexic people necessarily see it like that. We just want to make it roughly as difficult for people to read without dyslexia as it would be for people with dyslexia. Simone uses a slight tint, so instead, usually the background is white, but she makes the background a slight yellow in this case. That helps some dyslexic people, not all dyslexic people. There are various kinds of dyslexia. And she also uses a special font that is, I think it's even called dyslexia friendly or something like that. And it's, again, it helps some dyslexic people to read, not all dyslexic people. And there's some kind of ruler on the page that helps, especially when there are long lines of text that help you find your spot, which line you're actually reading. And this is Pavel. Pavel has Asperger's and anxiety. And the way how we try to simulate that is you constantly get lots of different messages that try to simulate him being distracted all the time. Oh, what is this noise? What is that? Oh, maybe I should eat lunch. I'm hungry, and all of that. And it's also trying to be distracting by the words just moving in and out of the screen. And one way how Pavel tries to, something that Pavel has that helps him a little bit is that he tries to make the colors a bit more soothing. So we've added some posters that makes it clearer what this actually is. It includes, basically describes who the personas are and has some kind of information that helps people to understand how to use the tools. You might ask, why Chromebooks? Because we first tried it on Windows. That was our very first automatic thing, because most of these people, these personas, would be using Windows. But it was really difficult. It's like switching between the profiles took, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute. It was really difficult. While on a Chromebook, it's literally just a second. It's so quick. Some of the tools were quite buggy. They were crashing all the time. The setup and the maintenance costs a lot of time, while because on a Chromebook everything is in the cloud, it's really super easy. And as soon as you've updated one on one Chromebook, the others update automatically. And also the setup is not easily transferable. We wanted to take this and give this to the world in an easy way. And if it had been on Windows, I think it's possible, but it's really, really difficult and very technical to do something like that. So yeah, so the biggest benefit of this particular setup is that it's really easy to replicate and share, which is exactly what we've done. So we've set up some web pages. There's the URL alphagov.github.io/accessibility-personas. And that's where we then have basically and that's multiple things. We have set up we were describing the setup. So if you follow that setup, you can have the very same setup. I said the word setup too often now. And we have mostly, so we're using Chromebooks, but we thought, not everyone has Chromebooks, so we also tried to do the same with just the Chrome browser, which works mostly, but not completely. There are some things which are not as good. And we'd love to also go further with this, because Chromebooks and Chrome is all the Google world, and it would be good to get out of that as well. So there might be something coming as well. And we blogged about it, and so far it's been one of the most popular blogs on the accessibility blog. But yeah, you have to be cautious about a couple of things. So first of all, this is no substitute for testing with real users. It's just the best experience that you can have, and understanding various access needs and what kind of problems that might cause with your website is watching real users use your website. It's just the most valuable thing to do. And although this gets you sort of a little bit into that direction, it's not the same. Also, a simulation is never a true representation of an impairment. It's only just trying to get close to it, but it can never be the same experience. And obviously also, as Richard said earlier, it can never be telling you how it is to have that experience, actually not just for 10 minutes that you're going to test, but actually for your whole life. And it's not appropriate for compatibility testing. Not many people with access needs actually use Chromebooks. They use what we have on the left-hand side of the Empathy Lab. So because the majority of users use JAWS as a screen reader, for example, and the Chromebooks use Chromebox. So that's also something to keep in mind. Because the layout of the Empathy Lab is quite open, it means you can just play around with things, and we try to make that bit really visual and I guess engaging, and that's much easier with these Chromebooks. But having a structured approach is often helps people introduce people new, especially new to accessibility. Many people might be too afraid to just try things out. They think, oh, what is that? That's weird, I'm not touching this. So we've done 2 specific things with these already. We've done something that we created something that we call Persona Mini Training. It's some short training exercises. They're designed to just last 10 or 15 minutes. We've created bad example pages. We've created pages that have intentional accessibility issues on them. And we ask people to do only 2 tasks on them. And we have these tasks on all the Personas homepages. So here's one example. Unfortunately, I cannot show it to you because it would be really a spoiler. You have to do it yourself because that's the best way you learn. But yeah, it was working, or it is working really well. People said it's eye-opening. They were blown away, and they now feel empowered to visit and use the lab. But it also really shows how it's often our design choices which disable people and not necessarily their impairments, especially as you see these bad and good examples side by side. One that causes problems and the other does not, just because it's designed in a more accessible way. There are a couple of challenges there. We had trouble getting people to sign up for this internal training. And it's difficult to do with more than 2 people because it's relying on experiencing things yourself. And if you have lots of people around one laptop, it's only one person who can experience it. Maybe it's still useful to see someone struggling, but it's more useful if you struggle yourself with these tasks. We're also still working on them and iterated them a couple of times. We haven't tested all of them, but lots of them. And there's still some training missing for 2 of the personas. The other thing we've done is persona testing. We created some typical task for a specific service, or rather it was a user researcher usually who does that. And then we involve the whole team. Everyone chooses one particular persona, and then they do those tasks for 1 hour, just 1 hour. They write notes, and at the end, we discuss those notes and our findings. There were a couple of challenges, but it usually went quite well. So you need accessibility specialists to help interpret the results. So Richard and me would be there after that hour and would talk through with the people leading that, because often people who are not used to assistive technologies would pick up things that are no accessibility issues. They just don't know how to use the tool. So that's one example that happens a lot. So we need to then tell them, yeah, actually that's not an issue. That was fine. And also the screen reader and speech recognition persona, they both need a bit more help, an introduction in the beginning. Although we found that speech recognition works really well. People only need like less than 5 minutes and they just keep going, while screen readers need a bit longer and you need to help them throughout that hour. The biggest benefits really are that, well, it's more engaging than just an audit report. You have experienced things yourself. That is just trumps all things. It involves the whole team, not just the one person who knows a little bit about accessibility, who's usually then there to fix things. It raises awareness and understanding. You test accessibility issues really early on. It's because it's so easy to do. You can do it more often, and it's really quite efficient. And it works even well with people who don't know anything about accessibility. So this is us, actually. That was our very, very first testing session, where we see, well, everyone is doing one persona. I think we have nearly all personas. And so far we've done 5 sessions. And in our very first persona testing that you just saw, we found 9 definite and 5 potential issues, which is actually really quite good for just 1 hour. And team members wanted to come back. They wanted to try out a different persona, or wanted to retest things after they fixed things. So that was really very successful in that respect.
Okay. Yeah, so what's next? We've got some ideas of what we want to do next. We want to obviously improve things, make things better, make it more useful. One of the things we've thought about is whether we should have some instructional videos that can help people get to grips with understanding how to use the assistive technology. We're not sure about that yet. It might be difficult to do, but we're thinking about it. We will probably do some further layout improvements, tidying up, and possibly need more equipment at some point. We might try and come up with a more elegant way of nailing things to the bench. This is an example from John Lewis, actually, and most phone shops have this sort of stuff, and several people have gone in and asked people in phone shops, where'd you get your phone equipment from? And the shop assistants really aren't interested, they want to sell the phones. So there's another example of that, how that works. So it's nice because it includes the charging of equipment and stuff, but that's kind of a nice to have, you know, and maybe we won't necessarily go down that route. What we do want to do, though, is we want to encourage people to set these up themselves. And I keep telling people, you don't need a lot of money or equipment to start this. You can start with something as simple as an old Android phone. Just put TalkBack on it and test with it. Or an old Windows machine you've got. Anything. You can start with whatever you like. You can start small. And obviously the Chromebooks illustrate that you can start things with an inexpensive piece of kit without spending any money or much money on software. So we want people to share their experiences with us. We want to learn as well, and we know that other organisations, both in the UK, government and elsewhere, are setting up empathy labs, so we want to learn from them as well. We want to hear your experiences. So I'll hand back to Anika.
Yeah, and how we want to handle the visits, really, because, you know, we're just 2 people. We would love to have more empathy labs in the public sector. We need some internal help as well, which we started to do, to like train people up to run these sessions, the visits as well. And we really should get a feedback form after each visit, which I wonder why we haven't done it yet, but it's such a standard thing where we haven't got around it yet. And for the personas, so there's still two personas are still missing that mini training. We still need to add that, and we need to test it more. And adding some alternative setup, which I mentioned before, maybe, you know, just with Firefox, for example, that might work. And we should encourage more people to do this persona testing, because it was so successful that really every team would benefit from that.
Yeah, so we're trying to make resources available to do this, and Anika has posted quite a lot on the blog posts. Al posted about how we built the Empathy Lab, and all the blog posts are, well, some of the blog posts, some are on the GDS general blog, but a lot of the blog posts are on the accessibility blog, so I would encourage you to go there to find some of these resources. And so here, for example, is the one I was just talking about, using persona profiles to test accessibility. So, thank you very much. Over to Al for questions.
So we've got 3 questions on the app. If you have more questions, please do ask away. We will run a microphone round as well. So let me start with the first question. So do you make use of the visual impairment glasses for persona testing, and are they otherwise useful?
For the persona testing, for some reason, we initially intended to use them for particular Claudia. Claudia is visually impaired, but she zooms in, and what we found is we cannot actually have a simulation, because when you have a simulation that sort of blurs the screen and you zoom in, the blurring gets worse as well. So you also zoom into the simulation, which is why we initially thought we would just use the simulation glasses, but in the end it wasn't actually necessary. But lots of people actually choose to use them. They think, hey, yeah.
And people have certainly used them on the Windows machine when using screen reader, because we haven't got it set on there so it blurs everything out. So people often wear glasses that blur everything out so they can only see perhaps the colours on the screen. Yeah, we've done that.
Can the Empathy Lab persona demo be used outside the government lab?
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, it's open source. Actually, we've open sourced the documentation about how you can set it up yourself. And the mini training is part of that.
So basically, because if you've got a Chromebook, you can download the profiles and...
You cannot download, you have to set it up, but it's very, very easy to set up. By the way, I've got my... We don't have one of our Empathy Lab Chromebooks with us, but I have my personal Chromebook with me, and I've got the personas on there, so if anyone wants to play around with them, well, I guess I will be here and my Chromebook is there. So.
Why would you not use the personas across the devices?
Across the devices? Oh, that goes back to, it was so difficult to set it up on Windows. It's even more difficult to set it up on the others also. Not all of the personas would use phones the same way, for example. I think it theoretically would be a good idea, but it's really difficult to do.
Cool. We've got a question from Neil. Charities will be a great partner for additional empathy labs, particularly those involved with older people with disabilities. Do we know who has them already?
I don't. Do you?
Yeah.
So we know that HMRC has set up an empathy lab up in Newcastle, and they're planning to set a few different ones around the country.
Yeah, I don't know if any charities have done it. No.
NHS are looking at setting one up.
Yeah.
CRUK must have one, I'm sure. There's going to be some of the big charities that definitely will have one, I imagine.
So basically, because if you know of any empathy labs, or if you're planning on setting one up, so I know that Simon from British Airways is here, they're thinking of doing something. I was chatting to Amazon, I think they're planning on doing some stuff as well. So do come and share your experiences. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to find out how people are getting on and how they're doing it.
Also, I know there's a website for device labs, that's sort of a database of all the device labs in the country. I forgot the URL, but it would be great to have something similar for empathy labs.
Yeah. Last question from here is, the Empathy Lab helps people identify accessibility problems in design and tech. What's the next step? How does GDS help people discover the solutions?
Well, we provide a lot of other resources as well around guidance for organisations to make things accessible. We're trying to build up the training that we do. We run introductory training, and we're trying to build up things like the persona training, so we'll be doing more of that, I guess. And we're trying to come up with more role-specific training, so we'd ideally like to be doing things for designers, things for content designers, stuff for developers. We have done some developer training before. We'd like to do more of that.
So it's also worth mentioning the text-based profiles on gov.uk. They actually have lots of solutions in them, and they, for example, explains that one of the most common issues with websites for screen reader users are forms not being accessible, and then that links out to the gov.uk design system that has accessible versions of forms. So it's kind of like a launch pad to solutions. So that's all the questions on the app. Did anybody have any questions that they wanted to ask that they haven't asked? So I will do a quick... Okay.
Hi Anika, Richard. Thanks for a great chat, or rather presentation. On the checklist earlier of reasons why people use the lab or organizations are using the lab. What were the more popular reasons?
So I guess the main point about those statistics were that they were quite close. I think testing was lowest with 60-something percent.
60%.
And the others were like around 70 or 80. But
yeah.
so that the interesting thing is that they were relatively even, and we were quite surprised by that. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's not an exact science recording all that information. We always offer people an introduction. We ask people how much they know about accessibility, and some people come in with quite a bit of knowledge, some very little, but they're always keen to get a good understanding of what we've set up and how it works. Yeah, so it is, a lot of it is about empathy and awareness, I think. Yeah.
Bryn.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you very much for that. It's a fantastic initiative, and I'll definitely be taking it back to the company that I work for, which is Site Improve, to talk about that, because it's a super nice thing to demonstrate when we have clients who come in to help them understand really what the whole thing is about. A lot of people that we talk to accessibility about are really, really new in that whole sort of in that topic, in that domain. So I think this is a fantastic way to sort of get people on board. My question was, you talked about like 66% were coming in to do testing, give or take. At what phase how far along their deliveries was the testing being conducted? Was this at the end of a project, halfway through, wireframes? Do you have any information on that?
It's very, very different, because we get a very broad group of people from all over. I guess, I think the majority probably gets there towards the end. It's unfortunately the common thing.
Yeah.
But we get all sorts.
We do get people coming in with prototypes, early stage prototypes. We also run clinics separately, and we get people coming into those, and they're often more the sort of very early stages of wireframes, graphic designs and prototypes. But yeah, we're getting quite a range, really. Yeah.
We're also getting quite a range of what people already know. And what I found, if people don't know much about accessibility yet and they came to learn more about accessibility, they usually go to the right-hand side of the Empathy Lab and just focus on the Chromebooks, because I guess it's easier. While people who already know a lot, they focus on the left-hand side, they actually want to test.